Real talk for a second. If I handed you a packet capture and said, hey, a workstation accessed a web server, did anything suspicious happen? Would you know where to begin? Would you know where to start? Or would you do what everyone does the first time? You'd open Wireshark, scroll a little, then scroll a little bit faster, and then panic scroll, and quietly hope the answer just magically shows up? Yeah, I've been there, done that, and unfortunately more than once, especially early in my career. But today we're going to fix that. This is not a Wireshark tutorial. This is a SOC investigation. We're using the same steps analysts use when alert is real, not when it's a quiz. If you want to follow along, you can grab practice pcap number 3. It's free, linked right in the description. All right, let's slow this down and do it the right way. All right, the very first rule in any SOC is don't inherit someone else's assumptions. And we see this all the time. If you see something in this little field right here, the first thing we want to do is clear that out. You'll notice there's nothing in there, but if there was, all we have to do is erase it. We can just go through and delete it, do backspace, and then hit enter. And what you should see is traffic just like we have here, right? We have a bunch of different sources. Nothing's all messed up. We're not seeing all UDP. We're not seeing all HTTP or TCP. We're not seeing all the destinations. We're not seeing all the ports. The other thing we want to make sure we're doing is that our numbers are lined up correctly. And we see very easily 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, all the way down to 21. So everything's in order the way it's supposed to be. So just in case you don't recall, the very first question when we got handled this pcap, it was a workstation accessed a web server. Did anything suspicious happen? And so that was the question we're going to feed off of, which is really asking, where was this system trying to go? Where was this system trying to go? Now, because in a SOC, destination equals intent, internal app, probably fine, no vendor, likely fine, random external hosts. Okay, we need to start paying attention here. So let's start right off the bat with going at the very, very top, and we're going to hit HTTP because we're going to filter by that HTTP traffic. Now, this is a pretty short and sweet pcap, which is kind of nice, but we want to start looking right here at the IP addresses. We want to know what's going on. Now, you'll notice they all start with 192. And if you remember from our past lectures, is that a public or a private IP address? Now, you may be wondering why we typed in HTTP other than the obvious there, but I want to point out a couple things, right? We want to reduce the noise when we start looking through these pcap files. And the reason is that if the alert is web traffic, I don't care about anything else. I only care about HTTP traffic, and in some cases, HTTPS, right? But for this one, we're just going to use HTTP. All right, let's go through this, right? Once you land on a GET request, which we can see several here, right? We can see this first one right here. We see a GET request for analyst.txt, so we got some notes there. We see another one right here, and it looks like it went to embedded.html. We can see yet another one right here. Looks like it was looking for an image or a JPEG. Now, right off the bat, we've got those three, but I want to point out that if I start looking at it, we see this very first one, we see 200 OK. Now, 200 OK comes back and it says, yes, it was able to grab that text. It was able to grab that information right there, okay? Then we see the next one. If I scroll down to packet number 29, we see a GET request for embedded.html. And again, we see that 200 OK. And we can see the little line right over here. On the left-hand side, you see the arrow, meaning that, hey, this was what sent it. So that's the requester. And this is the server responding back. And that's important. Okay. All right. Now let's go to this other one, this image, local image.jpg. We can see again over here. Let me get rid of that purple. Well, we can see here that the requester on packet number 46 said, hey, I want to get, so I'm going to get this for me. And then we see on packet 49 that the server responded back with 404, not found. That means that image does not exist. There is no JPEG called local image.jpg. So now that we've got our host, we've got our client, we can also look at the ports that they operated on. Now, if you set this up the way that you were supposed to, when we went through this at the very, very beginning, you'll also see that the source port, right, and the destination port are already there. We don't have to dive into the nitty gritty down here, but I'll show you how to do it just in case. And we can see from packet 46, we've identified this being in the client, and this is the associated port that it's operating on. And then we can see 192.168.124.7, we'll see that it is responding on port 8080. Now, you might be wondering yourself, okay, well, I thought HTTP traffic was only on port 80, and normally it is, but that's not a die-hard rule. That's not a requirement. So we're seeing that the server is actually operating for purposes of HTTP, in this instance, on port 8080, and that's the important part. All right, let's break down a little bit. Now, at the bottom, we can actually find that information. It's still readily available to us, but we can see destination and source port right under transmission control protocol, that TCP, and we see the source port, and we see the destination port. So just in case you don't have it set up here, when we set up the configuration for Wireshark, it's still available down here. Now, one of the important things that we want to understand is who started the conversation, and this is important. And 9 times out of 10, I would say probably 99 times out of 100, it's going to be from the client requesting from the server. But if it's not, if it's reversed, that's an issue. That's where we need to start doing a little bit of investigation. So source ports are one of the fastest ways to do that, right? Clients initiate the connections and servers respond. So if those roles look backwards, that's always a red flag. So we're going to right click on the get packet, and we're just going to stay here on packet 46 just because I'm going to pick on that one, right? So I'm going to right click on this one. I'm going to go down to follow, and then I can go to TCP stream. Now, this looks sort of like a phone call, right? One side dials in, the other picks up, and when they talk, well, they talk. At the top of the window, you'll see something like client IP. Let me grab my little thing right here. Now, where students get confused is this right here. Is this host 192 right here? Because if I were to look this over, right, we just already identified on packet 46 that our client, our source, is coming from .6, not from .7, but we see .7. And so one of the questions, especially if you're in a CTF or something like that, that students usually get wrong is they're like, well, who's the host? And they come in here and it says host, and then it says 192.168.124.7 on port 8080. This, ladies and gentlemen, is not the host. This is what's being hosted on. And so there's a little bit of a difference in the vocabulary, the vernacular associated with it. This is the server. It is, even though it says host, it's the server. It's the content is hosted on. And so make sure that you understand that little vernacular, because so many students, so many get a little bit confused by that. So let's start right at the very top. We see a get, okay? The get is the client is requesting the data. This is read only. There's no upload, no modification. We are getting something. The source was requested. This is the source. Our TCP lab, /lab, images, local image.jpg, all of that is part of that, right? So it tells us exactly what the client wanted. So they're trying to get, and we're looking at that JPEG. That's what they're trying to understand. That's what they're trying to get. Before I trust any data, I want to confirm the session was legitimate. And this sounds pretty mundane. It sounds like, oh, well, why would I need to do that? But I want you to understand that if there's no handshake, if there's no trust associated with it, no handshake, no trust. This helps catch spoofing, failed exploits, and those weird half-open connections, which is actually an attack, right? So what do I want to do? I want to go on. I'll look at this GET request again. So we're going to click on that. I'm going to right-click, and we're going to go to Conversation Filter right here. From there, I'm going to hit TCP. This is going to bring up that conversation. Now, look, this provides us a lot of good information. Not as whole capture, but as a idea that the TCP handshake actually took place. And so we're going to start right here at the top, right? This is what we just did, which was packet number 46. And we can actually see 46 right here with that GET request. There it is. All right. So look, 43, right at the very top. We can see packet, or I should say, yeah, packet number 43. We saw that great information, and we see synchronization, right? First aspect of a three-way handshake, SYN. Second aspect of a three-way handshake, SYN-ACK. We're acknowledging. Third part, acknowledgement. There's our three-way handshake right there, 43, 44, and 45. All of that is going to provide us those three packets, and if you ever can't find them, if you ever go through this and you don't see them, that's a problem. Let's say that I had SYN, and then I had SYN-ACK, and there was no acknowledgement. There's no acknowledgement. Ladies and gentlemen, that is an indicator of an attack, 100%. All right, this next part, this is where people tend to tense up. I don't understand why, right? It's not like we're doing hex. We're just looking at hex. We're going to verify what Wireshark pretty much already decoded, and we call that sequence numbers. Those sequence numbers prove session integrity. And if these are wrong, well, things get very, very quickly interesting. And so let's start right here. We're going to take our SYN, our synchronization right there, number 1. Packet number 43. I'm going to go back to that TCP, that transmission control protocol. I'm going to expand that out, and then I'm going to go to sequence, right? We can see the sequence number in the raw, and then we have the second or the next sequence number it's expecting, which is number 1. So let's click on this raw, and we can see our hexadecimal format. It's literally right there. Look, it's right there. Not too difficult. It's important because the sequence number actually matters way more than people actually think it does. Think of TCP like a really long text message, right? Not one bubble, but a whole conversation. Now imagine I send you a message, but instead of one chunk, it arrives in pieces and it's out of order. Maybe a few pieces even go missing, and one piece shows up twice for no reason. If there were no sequence numbers, your phone would just shrug and say good luck. But sequence numbers tell the receiver exactly where each piece belongs. When TCP connections start, right here at the send packet, both sides pick a random starting sequence number, not because they're bored, because if they didn't, attackers could just guess. And if attackers can guess it, then they can inject data, they can hijack sessions, or they can completely break the connection. So that random number is basically TCP saying, all right, we're starting the conversation at this page number. Everything else builds from here. From a SOC perspective, this is gold, right? Because sequence numbers let us answer one and very important question. Does this packet actually belong in this conversation? If the numbers jump in a way that doesn't make sense, if they repeat, if they overlap, that's not Wireshark being weird. That's a sign that something may be broken or even worse, manipulated. So in other words, sequence numbers are TCP's way of saying, trust me, but verify. Now, Wireshark, on the other hand, it shows this number in hex because that's what's actively on the wire. You don't need to do anything with the hex. You don't need to convert it. You don't need to fear it. You don't need to decipher it. You just need to know that the value is the ground truth and everything else is built on top of that. So when a question asks for a sequence number, it's not trivia. It's just asking whether you understand how TCP keeps conversations in order, intact, and safe. And once you get that, sequence numbers stop being scary and they start being useful. Okay, deep breath, long definition for that, but let's keep going. Now, while we're here, we're going to scroll down a little bit. I'm going to take this. We're going to scroll just a little bit. Look at this right here. We have our SYN right here. Now, that SYN is obviously right here at the very top on packet 43. If I go to packet 44, we can see that the flag changed from SYN to SYN-ACK and so on and so forth. Matter of fact, if I click on any of these, it will actually give me the flag associated with it. So this is where packets stop being just packets and they start telling us a story, right? TCP flags tell me what the packet is actually doing. So when I see a push and an acknowledgement together, that's TCP saying, hey, this isn't just housekeeping. This packet is carrying real data. Push it to the application. In other words, it's not a handshake. It's not a polite nod. It's the payload moving through the network. Now, while we're on flags, let's go ahead and expand down to window size. I'm going to push this down a little bit. Look at this calculated window size right here. This is one of those fields that people often skip, right? And then they wonder why their investigations feel kind of incomplete. But window size gives us performance context. It helps us answer things like, is the connection congested? Is one side throttling? Is the network struggling to keep up? If traffic feels slow or weird, this field often explains why without the guesswork. Now we see this number here, right? We see 64,256. And your first instinct is usually, okay, is this good? Is it bad? Is it too big, too small? What the hell does this mean, right? Short answer, 64,256 is fine. Let's talk about what this actually means. The TCP window size tells us how much data is one side is willing to receive before it needs acknowledgement back. Think of it like this. TCP is saying, hey, you can send me this much data before you need to check in. So window size is basically saying this, so you can send me 64 kilobytes of data before I say, hold up, stop. Now, if you imagine you're carrying boxes, a small window size is like saying, bring me one box at a time. A large window size is saying something like, no, bring me the whole stack. I can carry the entire room. In a modern network, we want the stack size to be pretty big if possible. In a SOC perspective, 64,256 is completely normal. In fact, is what you'd expect on a healthy local network, low latency, no congestion, no throttling, and it tells me that the connection is stable, it's responsive, it's not struggling. When would I care? Well, if this number were extremely small, if it was starting to shrink from one packet to the next, if it was jumping wildly around, this would indicate maybe some congestion, maybe a slow receiver, network reliability issues, maybe even some performance issues. But with this value, everything's fine. You can send the data freely. I'm not worried at all. So we know that GET requests retrieve data and POST requests move that data. Once you find a POST request, you need to follow the stream. So let's get rid of this filter. Let me go ahead and get rid of this. We're going to hit that enter. And we can see this right here. Now we're going to type back in HTTP to bring us back over here. And we are going to look for that post. We've got one right here on packet 286. We're going to right click. We're going to follow. And then we're going to do that TCP stream yet again. All right, we're going to take a quick timeout. This is one of those things in Wireshark that looks incredibly obvious. And then quietly trips people up later. So let's clear this up. When you follow a TCP stream, you see two colors, red and blue. Now, here's the important part. Red is the side that spoke first. It's not always the client. And blue is the side that responded. It's not always the server. In most cases, it is, but that's not how it works, right? So red is side that spoke first. Blue is the response. That's it. That's all the colors mean. It doesn't mean client. It doesn't mean server, all right? Now, in most HTTP cases, like the ones we're looking at here, the client starts the conversation. So in this stream, red is the client, blue is the server. And this matters, but that's not a rule of Wireshark. That's just how HTTP usually behaves. If you ever jump into a stream halfway through, or you're looking at different protocols, those colors could flip you up really, really quickly. Our goal here is to find out how many TCP segments were required to complete the client's upload, because we've understood the upload. We know the upload is there, but we want to find out how many segments were associated with it. So I'm going to close out this window. We don't need it anymore. We only count the packets that actually carry data. So we're going from the client to the server. That's it. Acknowledgements. Those are just got it messages. They don't count. Handshake packets. Those are just a connection saying hello. So those don't count. If the packet didn't move data, it doesn't move the needle. Trust me, once you follow this rule, counting these uploads goes from being confusing to almost boring. And boring is exactly what we want in the SOC. So let's do it. Now we're going to start at the very, very, very top. So let's go all the way top. Now we're not going to count synchronization packets. We're not going to count those, right? And what we want to do is we only want to count the packets that are actually coming from the acknowledged standpoint, right? In this case, it's 192.168.124.6. So I'm going to click on that source right there. Okay, so I don't have to worry about, at this point, anything at .7 because .7 is going to be after .6, all right? The second thing I need to watch out for is all this other garbage on the side, right? We have our synchronization, we have our acknowledgement packets, and then we have our push acknowledgement, okay? So we want to count this manually, and it becomes a little bit of a chore, a little bit boring. We want to go through and start counting this. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4. Look at the length. That's what I'm counting. So we're at 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. I'm on packet number 72 now. Let me scroll down. Right now, I could go through and count all these, right? Which is what I'm doing. Or to be quicker, I could just start right here, which is 58. And I want to count the numbers to make sure that I'm not seeing any grievances in there, right? Because we went to 69 and then you'll notice we skipped 70. So I'm at -1 already. And if you do this too quick, you'll definitely be in favor, which I almost did, right? 64 and 65 are both missing. So that's 3. And you can kind of go and see, is this the way you want to do it? I do not prefer it this way. I'm going to do it the old-fashioned way. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 at 72. So at the end of the day, I'm just going to count all of those. Anything that doesn't have, that has a get or doesn't have an acknowledgement, we're just going to skip. But you can count all of these packets as you go all the way through until you get to the bottom. Now, let's stop here for a second. You see this post? Not counting that. Not counting that. Don't count that one, right? And we're making sure that we're staying on the .6. As soon as we see fin, we're done. That's the last one, okay? All right, so if you counted all of that, you should have the correct answer. We're not going to do that today. We'll be here all night. Now, you're probably asking yourself at this point, okay, great. I can count TCP segments. Why exactly do I care? And honestly, that's a very fair question because I asked the exact same thing when I was learning this. And it's because in a SOC, nobody gets excited just because traffic exists. We care about the impact. An HTTP post by itself just tells me something was uploaded. But when I count how many TCP segments actually carry data, now I know how much moved and how it moved, and that difference matters. 1 or 2 segments is probably a tiny form of submission, right? But a couple hundred segments, that's a real file. Thousands of segments, now we're sitting up straight, same protocol, very different stories. This also helps separate normal behavior from weird behavior. Normal apps upload data in a pretty predictable pattern, right? Attack tools, on the other hand, don't. They chunk things differently. They burst, they pause, they throttle, they repeat. And you don't see that just by looking at bytes transferred. You have to see it by looking at how many packets were involved. It's kind of like this. If I tell you someone moved to a couch, that's useful. But if I tell you how they moved it, slowly, quietly, in pieces at 3 a.m., now you're asking better questions. It's the same idea here. From a SOC perspective, counting segments gives you something I can defend. If I say, hey, about 300 kilobytes were uploaded, that's helpful. If I say those 300 kilobytes went across 217 payloads carrying TCP segments, now I have network level proof. That's the difference between a guess and investigation. So no, we don't count TCP segments because the quiz told us to. We count them because they help us answer the real question. Did something meaningful actually leave the system, and should I care? And that's SOC work. Okay, speaking of impact, let's go to statistics right here. Then we're going to go to conversations, just like before. All right, this is one of my favorite spots on Wireshark because it cuts through all the noise right here. This is going to tell us impact. This is going to tell us impact. A few bytes, not a problem. A few hundred, well, we might want to start paying a little bit of attention. But megabytes? That's no longer a casual conversation. This is the moment where an alert goes from to, all right, maybe we should dig into this a little bit more. This is why I love this view. All right, let's bring this one home. Let's finish this one out. What we did today wasn't about memorizing filters. It wasn't about racing to the right answer. And it definitely wasn't about panic scrolling through Wireshark and hoping for the best. We've been there and done that. It's never worked. Instead, we treated this like a real investigation. We started with one simple question. Did anything suspicious actually happen? And step by step, we answered in a way that SOC analysts would. We cut down the noise. We focused on the conversation and what mattered. We'd follow the stream. We confirmed whether data really moved. And we measured impact instead of guessing. No vibes, no assumptions, just the evidence.